PrimePay's monthly broker webinar series here in March. The snow is still on the ground here in the Northeast. Well, shoot, quite frankly, probably for many states across this great country here, and but hopefully that will be diminishing over the coming weeks. But we thank you so much for taking the time here out of your busy schedules to sit with us here today. My name is Steve Jackson. I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategic Development and Channel Sales here at PrimePay, and we truly want to thank you for joining us here today. We have been holding these webinars over the last 8+ years, and as many of you know, our attempt each month is to provide you with very rich and valuable content, right? A lot of technical guidance, a lot of plan design, strategies, solutions, but in the same time, take that content and really bring it in a way that's practical so that you can take it immediately, go to your employers, your clients, your prospects, and be able to deliver a very value-added solution to whom you're sitting with. And so once again, as part of our webinar, kind of our breadth of webinars that we have done, today's content is based on the final regulations that were published here recently, just a couple weeks ago, in regard to the employer information reporting requirements. This is by far the hottest topic that we see from our broker partners today, but also from our employer clients here today. And we, for many of you, possibly, you attended our webinar in January where we went over these specific items on that webinar. Well, since we got the published information, we thought it would really behoove us to really take the additional final, the data requirements, information gathered from the final regulations and present it to you in full so that you have really the cleanest and clearest, well, let's put it this way, to provide greater clarity here to you as to exactly what is needed for this specific reporting requirement. So before we get started, I stated this here before for those of you who have joined us, as you can tell, your phones are muted, but that does not mean we do not want to hear from you. We covet your questions. We would absolutely value the questions that you would ask. So what I would ask is that you go ahead and go into the GoToMeeting menu bar, go ahead and type in your question, and then we will do our best, probably again not during the webinar, but at the end and in any follow-up material that we might provide, would be able to provide kind of a frequently asked questions, and we are now providing that exclusively to our broker concierge partners. So with that, though, we also will be making a recording of this. It will be posted on our Broker Concierge YouTube channel, which is usually done, roughly 2 days after the webinar. So look for that around Friday. We should have that available to you. Okay. So with that in mind, let's get into the content here today, as we've got a lot here for you. As you think about this, as you look at the picture, you look at these guys, I call them the PrimePay guys, they're doing the wave, right? Every one of us probably has been to some sports event where a wave was started. And, until everybody gets moving in the right, in the right way, right, it doesn't look very good. It's not clean. It doesn't really look like a wave. But boy, when you have been at a game, when you have seen the wave in action, when every member is really working like they should, man, the wave looks pretty cool, right? Well, think of that here in this employer information reporting requirement. There is a data set, data information. There is a lot of information here that if you don't collect it properly or do not collect it here kind of ongoing, you can run into a lot of issues when we finally get to the time period in which you are ready to file or you are ready to create an employee statement. So it's very important as I go through the content here today. I'm going to show you a lot. And today, since we have the final regulations, I'm going to take a deep dive in regard to the actual forms themselves. So take some excellent notes as I kind of go through the process here of working through that, because I want you to think about these things. Where will your employer, where will you or your employer and your employer get or gather this information. Very important, and we're going to cover that kind of here at the end in regard to just kind of communicating and gathering the information needed. So we're going to cover these 5 key areas. Some may be quicker than others so that we can get right to the forms themselves and really dig into the meat of what we need to gather. So as we spoke earlier in the year, and certainly as we think about, here March of 2010, when ACA got, became law really at that point, it started this, this process of timelines, right? And different things were going to be required at certain points throughout these many years, and we've seen many of those deadlines come and go and be acted or delayed in one form or another. But there's a timeline due to ACA that goes all the way out to 2018 and beyond, right? And so one of those important requirements that was on this timeline is this information reporting. And as of February 8th, 2015, so just a few weeks ago, the final regulations and requirements were finalized by the IRS, okay? And so now that that is out, you have to be asking your clients today if they're ready for it. It's a great FUD question to ask. Maybe some of your clients don't even know about it yet. They haven't researched it yet, or they've kind of seen it on the peripheral side of their, research and information, but haven't really dove into it. So let's go ahead and dive into it. Since we have information that's finalized, we can speak with some clarity here in regard to what this is all about. So as you think about the 2 key mandates of ACA, you have the individual mandate and you have the employer mandate, right? There's a lot of other requirements that are there, okay? Many requirements, right, that cause a lot of agita for all of us. But if you look at the key mandates, the individual mandate, the employer mandate is the key mandate, right? And with those mandates, for those who do not wish to play or participate in those mandates and requirements, the individual or the employer will have to pay a penalty, right? So the IRS is the key enforcement agency of those mandates. Well, how will the IRS know for sure if the individual that went to healthcare.gov, enrolled in coverage, says they qualify for a subsidy and receives that subsidy? How is the IRS to know whether one, is the individual qualified for that subsidy? Now, they could first look at the household income, right, W-2 income, household income of that individual, and make some early assessments, but do we know if that individual is employed by an employer who has offered coverage, offered minimum value coverage, has offered affordable coverage, right, where that individual would not be eligible for the subsidy regardless of where the income, income level would be based on federal poverty level, right? So basically, as we look at the purpose of these forms, it is to provide the verification and enforcement of really providing mandate consistency for the individual and employer. It is that more stringent audit process that hopefully will be further automated, where the IRS will be able to maintain consistency in this mandate and apply those penalties in a more efficient, administratively efficient fashion. Okay, so I think we know that to a large degree, but as you talk with your employers, the basis for this is that the IRS does not come back to that employer, right, and say, hey, these 2 employees of yours received a subsidy. Did you offer? I don't know if you offered coverage. I think a penalty is due you here, employer. So by having and providing this information from the employer, that's going to help alleviate a lot of that inconsistency or that extra work in verifying whether they are deemed to be due that penalty or not. So what I decided to do, and I did it before, so you'll look at some of these slides, they're a little similar, but there's a lot of changes here as I go into the forms. But I want to lay a basis here for what the requirement is about, okay, and we'll just take the purpose here a little bit further. Internal Revenue Code sections 6055 and 6056 were created under ACA, okay, and so I'll break these down here into, just so that we have a foundation. So Section 6055 deals with compliance with the individual mandate. So 6055 is going to be solely focused on the individual mandate to ensure what? That individual has minimum essential coverage. ACA then added that every provider of minimum essential coverage will be reporting that coverage information. All right, so anyone who is providing it, that's an insurance carrier, it could be potentially a TPA, a plan sponsor, employer. Every provider of minimum essential coverage will report, and they must report two things under 6055. They must file an individual return, that's also called in IRS speak a transmittal, but it's also, they must furnish a statement to individuals or an employee statement. You must provide something to the employees, much like a W-2 statement reflecting wages, deductions, and so on and so forth. So they must furnish that statement. So that is applicable to 6055. Now, under 6056, this statute or this really falls under compliance with the employer mandate. So we've got the individual mandate covered under 6055, and now we're covering under 6056 the employer mandate, and this information goes directly towards that. ACA requires all applicable large employers to report coverage information. So very similar to under 6055, you must file an informational return, which is, again, the transmittal, but you also must provide statements to the full-time employees about that coverage, okay? So we're going to break this down here a little bit more, but that's the basis. So 6055 really focused on data needed for individual mandate compliance, and 6056 is really covering the data needed to comply with the employer mandate. So as we think about the responsible parties, this is pretty important, right? I mean, one of your biggest or largest conversations will be not only the data that's needed and how your employers will capture that data, but it's also going to be focused on, who is responsible for what. As you look at that picture, I think I'll put myself in as one of those little red PrimePay guys, or, one is your employer, one is maybe you. We're all kind of running from it, right? Does anyone want to take responsibility for it? But the end result is we know exactly who is responsible, and so that's what we want to cover here today, because absolutely someone is responsible for that coverage. So what I've done here is I thought before we would really dive into the granular details of what is needed, I would provide a quick summary, okay? So this is new. I just, real quickly want to break this down. And as we go through the rest of the slides, I probably will keep reiterating a few things. That way it's just sinking in, as much as it can here at this point. So I've broken this out into three areas. Your plan type at the top, applicable large employers, okay, so your large employers, generally 50 or more full-time employees and equivalents, and then non-applicable large employees, which will typically be the 50 or 49 and under employees, okay? So, and then to the left, I have broken this out by an employer not providing any coverage, an employer providing fully insured coverage, and then an employer providing self-insured coverage. All right. So as we look at the applicable large employers, if an applicable large employer does not offer insurance, they would still be required to complete the transmittal and employee statements of 1094 and 1095C. For a small employer or non-applicable large employer, no employer reporting would be required. So generally those 49 and under, they would not be required to do anything, okay, with this reporting. So not bad. For fully insured coverage, okay, the applicable large employer will need to complete 1094C and 1095C. Now, under a carrier, if it's fully insured, a carrier will be completing some of that information, okay? But in just looking at an employer action item, 1094 and 1095C would be required. For non-applicable large employers, there is no employer reporting in this instance because they're utilizing fully insured coverage, and now the carrier will file forms 1094 and 1095B. okay? Under self-insured coverage, all right, for a large employer, applicable large employer, 1090, so very consistent here, all right, they're going to complete 1094 and 1095C, okay, those are going to need to be completed. Now, in this case, the employer is probably the plan sponsor, right, and so they would be responsible for filling in a lot of those other details, where a carrier would fill in under a fully insured coverage plan. And then lastly, the far bottom right corner, the non-applicable employees, for self-insured coverage, they are now the carrier, right, the provider of coverage, so they will now need to complete 1094 and 1095B, as in boy. All right, so this, you guys will have this, okay? So, you know, you can certainly take notes, but that's a kind of a quick snapshot of who's supposed to do what. But let's now break that down into some further and greater detail. So under 6055 reporting, I mean, I'm just going to use that here now. What you'll begin to see more and more in my slides is the actual forms of 1094 and 1095. But just to lay a basis for where all this is rolling up to, under 6055, that's covering the individual mandate. It's any person that provides minimum essential coverage they must report. So that is generally going to include, for fully insured coverage, your health insurance issuers or carriers, okay? So that's why I said before, you know, if you're a small employer and you have a fully insured medical benefit, then, you know, the carrier is responsible for 1094 reporting, okay? So here in this case, a health insurance carrier for fully insured coverage would be responsible. However, if you're a plan sponsor of self-insured coverage, you, or the employer, would be responsible for that specific coverage. So kind of basic here, but just to reiterate, you know, you get the question a lot, just, you know, what is minimum essential coverage, MEC? You know, it's eligible employer-sponsored coverage, so generally your group coverage, excuse me, your group-sponsored coverage would be included. COBRA, retiree coverage, can also be included as part of minimum essential coverage, or at least defined, you know, the definition. Medicare A and Advantage plans, most Medicaid coverage, CHIP coverage, most types of TRICARE, and then really any other coverage recognized by HHS. So as you think about, you know, your offering, what you deliver and offer to your employer clients, I would say for the most part, right, they're offering some form of minimum essential coverage. Insured plans, so just to break that down again and kind of reiterate here a little bit, but the health insurance carrier is responsible for reporting this health coverage on or under, you know, section 6055, and they're going to do that again under Form 1094 and 1095B, okay, if it's an insured plan. Self-insured plan, the employer is, or the plan sponsor, but generally the employer is responsible for reporting this health coverage on section 6055. And again, they, same thing, right? So 1094B, 1095B. So a small employer, so a non-applicable large employer that has a self-insured plan, and there's certainly those, many of those out there under 50, that they would be responsible for forms 1094 and 1095B. But if it's fully insured, the carrier wouldn't do that. So then as we think about 6056, so 6055, so 1094 and 1095B is focused on the individual mandate, okay? Who's providing minimum essential coverage? 6056 is solely focused on applicable large employers. So applicable large employers subject to the employer mandate must report, okay, so clearly that's, actually that should be an exclamation statement probably there rather than a colon, but applies to all employers that are AOLI members regardless of whether the employer is tax exempt or government entity, okay? Please look at what I just wrote there again. So Steve, are we talking about school districts? Yeah. Yeah, we're talking about all employers that are AOLI members, regardless of whether the employer is tax exempt, government entity, run the scope of the breadth of entities, and they're going to be covered. One thing that I want to note, that I want to stress, as you all know and are probably aware, you know, there was some transition relief of the employer mandate for employers that were under 100 full-time employees and or equivalents, right? So that 50 to 99 space. So some have come to me and said, well, Steve, I mean, you know, an employer group under 100 doesn't have to worry about this reporting. No. Yeah, so I want to just make a note is that the definition for an applicable large employer, which is what is written in the 60, 55, and 56 code, is defined as 50 or more full-time employees and or equivalents, okay? And again, that's determined in the previous year. So any employer, a large employer, would be defined as that. Okay, based on 2014. So you might have several employers here that were in the bubble, you know, right, sitting right around that 50 mark, well, or even 99, right, or 100 mark. So you definitely are going to want to look at that, ensure that your employer's prospects have run that calculation, and that's based on the 2014 calendar year. Okay. The general method of reporting for an applicable large employer will be through 1094 and 95C. Okay, so these are the C forms. All right, so 1094, 1095C. The 1094 is the transmittal form. 1095 acts as the full-time employee statement. Okay, that will be required as well. For self-insured plans, so you're going to have many employers, certainly with greater than 100 employees, that will be self-funded. The employer is able to complete 1094C and both sections, there's several sections, but a couple of those sections in 1095C, and that will allow them to just do one single return, which means that they will not have to do the B forms, the 1094, 1095B, if they're self-insured. So for fully insured plans, the employer will complete 1094C and then one section, in essence, of 1095C. The carrier, right, fully insured plan, carrier will provide that additional data. All right. So we're now going to dive into the details, and I'm going to really dive into the forms. What I've done is I have broken up each form, so the 4 forms, and have literally provided the content information for each section, for each, I mean, virtually for every section. Some, you know, I don't have to give everything, it's basic information, but I've provided it for virtually all of the pieces. As I go through these forms, I want you to think about, you know, this information that needs to be gathered and how you, as a broker, your agency, how will you be able to deliver a strong value-added solution here for your employers? Can you help? Will you help? You know, are you able to do anything to help your employer with this specific data requirement? There's a lot of things to check off. And so we're going to go through this here now, and again, this will be available to you, recorded, but feel free to take notes here as I go along. So as these are final copies here now, we have 1094 and 1095B. So again, those specific forms are in regard to the individual mandate, and all employers who provide minimum essential coverage must provide this transmittal. Okay, so 1094B, and then we also have 1095B. All right, so let's just kind of go through this here. If this is a fully insured plan, right, even a small employer, they're going to complete this form. The carrier will do that under a fully insured plan. If this is a self-insured plan, this might be the employer, okay, or plan sponsor. So just the first line here is you enter the filer's complete name. Now this, again, is a transmittal. This would be the carrier information, all right, the plan sponsor information. So that's line 1. We have line 2, you know, you enter in the EIN number, pretty basic. Lines 3 and 4, you enter the name and number of the contact person that would be available to answer any IRS questions that would need to be had in regard to the information transmitted. Lines 5 through 8, you would enter the complete address of the filer, you know, where all the specific correspondence from the IRS and such, you know, would be sent. And then on line 9, you would enter the total number of forms, 1095B, right? That's the employee statement. How many that are covered individuals, you know, what's the total number? And that would be transmitted with in conjunction with Form 1094B, okay, so that they have that information. So as I kind of sped ahead there, so pretty basic, right? I mean, that's relatively easy. Fully insured plans, all right. I mean, the carrier's going to manage that information, so not too overbearing. So we started with a simple one. All right. So now we have 1095B. All right. So 1095B is the employee return. Okay. This is the employee statement. All right, that is provided. And this information, or this is the information that would be provided to those employees. So there's several parts here. You see 4 different parts, and so we'll break this down here into each part if we can. The first, part 1, is covering the responsible individual. So this is the covered individual, all right, who's insured. The name, and just additional basic information, the demographics, right? So this is not the employer. This is the basic kind of demographic information for that covered individual. Then we get all the way down to line 8, and it states to identify the origin of the policy. So again, pretty simple, nothing too major. This employer might have received this coverage through a small business health options exchange, or the shop exchange. This could be basic employer-sponsored coverage, which would be probably general, you know, with what you would see. Could be government-sponsored coverage, individual market insurance, okay, by chance, and depending on who's transmitting this, right? You know, is what who needs to do this. So again, for group, for individual, these forms are available for both. So carriers are providing individual medical coverage and would note it so on this form. Multi-employer plan might be dealing with a MIWA or an aggregate type of an applicable large member, and so it'd be important to place that down. And then any other, I don't know, miscellaneous minimum essential coverage type of product that could not fit, at least in those other options. So identify the origin of the policy. Line 3 is the shop identification number or identifier. It's not applicable for filing here for this year based on 2014, but it will be required for the 2015 filing year, which is what we're doing right now. So what they would be saving for right now, they will need that here for the current 2015 year. Lines 10 through 15 basically is the employer, so name, employer identification number, address of the employer sponsoring coverage, pretty basic there. And line 16 through 22 is the name, employer identification, address, provider of coverage, okay? So it could be the carrier, could be a TPA, maybe potentially plan sponsor, you know, the employer themselves would put that information in part 3. And then lastly, kind of a big one, and actually before I do that, you'll see there, if you've been kind of watching part 4, we now break down covered individuals and so let's kind of break through what this A, B, C, D, and E actually mean. So under column A, this would be where you would place the name of each covered individual. So this would be the employee, right? That would be covered, let's say. And it would also be for the you know, spouse, if they were covered, any dependents that were listed, okay? So column A is the name of each covered individual for that employee. Column B, you know, social security number. You can truncate to the last 4 digits for the employee statement. Column C is the date of birth. Column D, you would check the box in column D if the individual was covered for at least 1 day per month for all 12 months. But if you couldn't check that, if they were not covered the entire time, I mean, think about it. You could have a newborn child, right, that came in May, and they were not covered in the previous 4 months, but are now covered starting in May. And so, you know, you couldn't check that box for that individual. You would check the boxes that they were covered. Column E then is if the individual was not covered for all months, you would check the applicable boxes for the months covered. And then if there's more than 6 covered individuals, you would just complete an extra return. So when you look at this, again, for employers with fully insured coverage, you know, there's some relief, I suppose, you know, for an employer with providing this information ultimately as part of a transmittal. Small employers or non-applicable large employers would not need to do this because if they're fully insured, the carrier is providing this information. So that's good. But you know, when you get into the applicable large employers or those employers 50 or more, that's really where we start to get the requirements, you know, kind of amping up the requirements here a bit more. So I hope that you kind of took down some of the data requirements here that I just showed you. Pretty important stuff in regard to, you know, just what's available or what will be available. All right, 1094C. Let's move on here to that. So we get into a lot more data here. So as it's been determined that you're considered an applicable large employer, you know, the data requirements, the responsibility of the employer goes up quite a bit. So let's try to go through this here. This 1094 is the transmittal that will go to the IRS. Well, they both will go to the IRS, but this is the specific transmittal form that will go to the IRS, so not an employee statement. So let's kind of go into this here a little bit. Lines 1 through 8 is getting information on the applicable large employer member. Okay, so it's the plan sponsor, it's the employer, you know, generally speaking. So name, you know, name, EIN, address, contact information, and so forth. And again, that's contact information for the IRS, not an employee, you know, who has a question. That would be from an IRS perspective. Lines 9 through 17, you enter designated government entity information, certainly only if that's applicable, and if this entity is filing on behalf of the employer. So I would say for many, 9 through 17 probably will be left blank. No need to put information there, but it could apply. Line 18 is the total number of forms. So you see some consistency here with the the B forms. The employer here needs to write in the number of forms 1095C, that's the employee statement, submitted with this form 1094 transmittal. And then we get into part 2, 19 and 20. You can run into, and we all have employers that are tied or connected to a controlled group, okay? What they have kind of coined this in regard to 60, 55, and 56 is an aggregated applicable large employer group, okay, an aggregated group, all right? And so if an employer that fits in this controlled group or this aggregated group, which transmittal, what they want to know here is, which is the transmittal that is kind of the master transmittal? It states on number 19 here, is this the authoritative transmittal? So that's the same thing. You know, is this it? Is this the main one that I should be looking at for kind of all of your members that flow up as part of your controlled group? And so that's lines 19 and even 20, just reflecting, you know, what's the total number of forms then that are going to be filed based on this aggregated AOLI group. Line 21, you know, again, I don't make a definition of what a controlled group is. That's going to need to be determined by their tax advisor, what have you, but they ask a specific question if this AOLI member is a member of an aggregated AOLI group, okay? So if it wasn't the authoritative transmittal, that would be important to notify. Line 22 gets into certifications of eligibility. As you know, there is a lot of transitional types of relief for applicable large employers in regard to whether the mandate does or does not apply, meaning the penalties, will they be assessed or not assessed if I, as an employer, fit into one of these categories, if you will. There's 4 that's listed. I will go into a little greater detail of those here just separately. Okay, so don't worry about that here just now. All right, the second page of the form is part 3, the AOLI member information monthly. Again, a little more information here. It breaks it down by months. We want to know whether there's minimum essential coverage, the full-time employee count, the total employee count, an aggregated group indicator, and 49 ADH transition relief indicator. So let's break into that. Did your eyes just gloss over a little bit? So part 3. So let's break this down. Column A is about the minimum essential coverage offer indicator. Now, do you as an AOE offer this coverage, minimum essential coverage, to 95% of your full-time employees? Okay, so that's column A, yes or no. Column B, full-time employee count for the applicable large employee member. Now you can skip this section, and I'll talk about it here as I dive into this specific offer method, but it would save some time and data. So we'll go over that here in a second. So that could be skipped if you select the 98% offer method. Column C, the total employee count for the AOE member. You include full-time and a variable hourly employee base, so total employee count. So now we're not just talking about full-time, but everyone. Column D, the aggregated group indicator. Well, you know, whether you are part of a aggregated group just by selecting the box. Section, and then column E, section 4980H, transition relief. Again, when I talk about 4980H, that is really the part of the statute that talks about defining an applicable large employer. Okay, so I mean that's really the nuts and bolts of that. So do you fit into that 50 to 99 transition relief, or do you fit under transition relief that would also fit for an employer that has 100 or more full-time employees? So a lot of information. The last form, part 4 then of this form, actually then just it only needs to be completed if this AOE member is a part of an aggregated or control group, an aggregated AOE group. And what they would do is if they had put yes on line 21, then they would list the names and EINs for the other AOE members. But they only list, I mean, if there were that many, they only list the 30 members by descending order, you know, so the largest of large and through the next 30. There's no additional sheet that is necessary, you know, with that. Okay? So that is 1094C. There is, as you can tell, there's a lot more information here that is going to need to be captured by your employers. The total employee count per month, the number of full-time employees per month. What, you know, so think about where this information is going to be gathered. Okay? All right, so that's part 4. All right, so now we get into, again, maybe the fun. I'll stop doing that. No, not fun, but get you information here in the 1095C requirement. This is the employee statement, so under 6056, that's covering the employer mandate. It states that you must file an employee return or provide as well or furnish an employee statement. So a lot of strong information here in regard to 1095C, and again, this is focused on 1095C, which is really focused on the applicable large employers, okay, in providing coverage. All right, so let's break this down here like I've done before. Part 1 is the basic employee information, lines 1 through 6, you know, name, social, and address, and so forth. So basic covered employee, actually, it's employee information. So your full-time employees. So I do want to state that as we talked about 6055 and 1094 and 95B, we were focused on covered individuals there, right? Right? So here we're talking about full-time employees. You could have full-time employees that take coverage, do not take coverage. Okay? All right. So let's so that's where part 1 sits. Line 7 through 13. This is going to be your basic AOE member information. So it's going to be your employer, generally speaking, you know, your employer, name, address, contact information. Now this is the contact information of the employer whom the participant may call, you know, with questions. And that's you know, so it's not who the IRS would contact in the other form. With that transmittal, this is actually from an employee perspective. Part 2, this looks like a convoluted big old bunch of information, right? But there is, under line 14, there is a code list, okay? And as you can see there, or as it starts, I don't know if I can break this out here a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Line 14, from left to right, we want to find out whether this employee was offered coverage, but we want to kind of know what type of coverage did you as an employer provide. So it provides 9 codes, 1A through 1I. And as an employer, you would state, and so I'm sorry for the acronyms, but I'll explain here. Did you as an employer provide minimum essential coverage, minimum value coverage, affordable coverage, and that coverage to the spouse and dependent as well? Did you offer that? If you did, all right, select code 1A, right? But if you as an employer were only providing minimum essential coverage and minimum value coverage to the employee only, you would select code section 1, but option 1B, okay? And that's kind of the flow here, all right? So it's just depending on how that employer is offering coverage to that specific employee, that's the type of code that they would put in from line 14 for either all 12 months or, from, each month. You place that code in for each month throughout the year, okay? Line 15, a little easier. We know what this generally is, but you would list the employee share of the lowest cost monthly self-only minimum essential coverage premium, okay? So lowest cost plan, right? But we're only looking at self-only coverage. You enter the amount, even including the cents, okay? If the employer has offered this minimum essential coverage but has no, if no contributions by chance, I don't know, are required, you'd enter in 0 there, if that would be the case. But pretty basic there. I think we're all comfortable in that definition here as it's been out there for some time. Line 16, as you all know, and I've kind of referenced before, due to all the timelines being met for the Affordable Care Act, there's been a lot of transitional relief items, safe harbors, if you will, that are out there for employers to take advantage of, okay, to kind of help them with the transition of providing this minimum essential coverage and affordable coverage. So line 16 is really telling the IRS, well, okay, I need to know from you, employer or plan sponsor, if you met any of the safe harbors, these transitional reliefs, on this employee. I need to know that because that's going to help me assess on the individual mandate side. So we go from 2A again to 2I, so there's 9 different kind of codes that would be listed. I'm not going to go into all the details of that, each one of those, but the employer would actually choose then which specific safe harbor that they might fall under. And many will. 2F, if you look at 2F, the affordability, Form W-2, this employer knows that the employee is not paying any more than that 9.5% of their wages, right? That type of a thing. So there are easy things here that the employer might list, if it's applicable. Part 3 is covered individuals. Lines 17 through 22 would only be completed for employers providing self-insured coverage, okay? Fully insured coverage will be reported by the carrier in 1094C, okay? So, again, just some good things to know and understand. So if you are a large employer and you have fully insured coverage, you would actually not need to do Part 3 here, okay, on this. All right, so I'll back up here just a second here, just showing this form here once again. That is the level of the forms. You've got the 1094, the B forms, where it's really focused on the individual mandate, anybody who's providing coverage. So if you're a non-applicable large employer, so a small employer, and you have fully insured coverage, you're not going to have to worry about it because the carrier is doing it, but basically if you're self-insured, you will. But as an applicable large employer, you're really going to be focused on these C forms, 1094 and 1095C, all right, regardless whether you're self-insured or fully insured. So I told you earlier that I wanted to break down the qualifying offer methods, and I just want to, hopefully I can shed a little bit more light in regard to, what these mean if an employer could be eligible for these methods. Think of this here just for a second. An employer, an applicable large employer member, has the ability to maybe reduce the amount of data that's needed on those forms if they become eligible for some of these methods, okay, these alternative reporting methods, okay? So some are not as envious as others, all right, and I'll try to show that as I reflect on this first slide. But this, if you think about a qualifying offer, okay, a qualifying offer is pretty simple definition. Do you as an employer offer minimum essential coverage? So do you offer coverage? Do you offer minimum essential coverage? Do you offer affordable coverage, right? I mean, that's the general definition of a qualifying offer of coverage to a full-time employee. So under this first method, to be eligible for this first method, the employer must certify that it made a qualifying offer, so what I just defined, to one or more of its full-time employees for all months during the year in which the employee was a full-time employee, for whom an employer shared responsibility payment could apply. So, meaning, you know, we've defined this individual as a full-time employee. They've gone through their measurement periods if they happen to be a variable hour employee, right? And we've now deemed them to be eligible for benefits and they're full-time. So, you know, this employer here could utilize this offer method if they actually fit that definition. Unfortunately, by selecting this offer, it actually does not reduce the amount of data that's needed in regard to the return. You still have to put virtually all of the data requirements in the form. So I would just say seek advice. I can't sit here and say it's better or worse for others, right? But it can still kind of complicate returns even by selecting this specific method. So another method that can be used is the qualifying offer method transition relief, okay? To be eligible for this, the plan sponsor, the employer, must certify that it made a qualifying offer, the definition I gave you, for one or more months of the calendar year 2015 to at least 95% of its full-time employees. Now, this might be very much easier to accommodate and would help alleviate some additional data components on those forms. One thing to note, that if an employee is still within their measurement period, say you have a new hire that's part of an initial measurement period, they would not be included in this calculation. That employee would not be part of that 95%, okay? So that could be very good, all right? So when we say here a limited non-assessment period, that's what that's referring to. An employee, a newly hired employee or other that's in some type of a look back or you know, initial measurement period. They would be removed from that calculation. As we get into the additional methods, we then get into a lot more of the 4980H transition relief items. So the first one, I'm not going to go through every one of these, but say the first one here, we all know that there is transition relief here for 2015 if you are an applicable large employer that has fewer than 100 full-time employees and or equivalent, so in that 50 to 99 space. All right, well that is good to know, right? Now you're still considered an applicable large employer member, but you have transition relief from the penalty. So the IRS in their enforcement and verification, they're going to want to know for sure, you know, can you state, you know, that you are eligible for that transition relief, okay? Then you would be alleviated from the penalty, the employer penalty. So as you go through this, you know, even down to the last bullet there that you see, you know, you do seek relief as well from non-calendar year plans, meaning if you have a fiscal plan year of May 1st, and, you know, which that would mean then that the first 4 months, January through April, you as an employer do not fall under the employer mandate. Your penalties begin, in essence, then, as of May 1st on that fiscal year. The last method is very interesting and would save a tremendous amount of data points in regard to filling out these forms, and that would be the 98% offer method. To be eligible for this method, the employer must certify that it offered for all months of the calendar year affordable coverage and minimum value coverage to at least 98% of its employees for whom it is filing a Form 1095-C statement, so that employee statement, that's full-time employees, okay? If that method is used, the employer is not required to complete the full-time employee count in Part 3, Column B of 1094-C. So you see here, I've kind of highlighted it here for you. So under Part 3, under column B there, you would not have to complete that and fill in the full-time employee count for all the months of the year, okay? So that actually would probably save a tremendous amount of time and energy in regard to that, so the 98% offer method could provide some data relief for your employers. How and when do you report this required information, right? So when's the reporting deadlines? I mean, for a lot of the ACA requirements, it feels like there's been a tremendous amount of moving targets, right? As you can see here in my picture. Guy can't, hey, settle down, slow down. But in this specific instance, with these final regs, we know what the deadlines are. So let's go ahead and dive into those. These have been set. So under 6055 reporting and 6056, there's two main action items for employers. You first must file, right? You must file a transmittal, but you also must furnish that employee statement. So under 6055 reporting, you must file an information return, okay? So that is the employee statement that you file with the IRS, and you also file the standard transmittal form in 94B. The deadline is the end of February, okay, for most. At least smaller employers. The deadline is February 29th. Next year is a leap year, so I've got February 29th or March 31st if you file electronically. Health coverage provider must provide a statement to the enrolled individuals on or before January 31st, 2016, and really what's preferred, and I would really check into it before you do it electronically, these statements should be sent by mail. So think about the W-2 requirements, right? I mean, it's very similar, okay? You know, it's got to be out by the end of January, and you've got to file, in essence, by the end of February or March, you know, depending on how you're filing it, electronically or manually. So similar functionalities here in regard to the specific transmittal. So under 6056, so for the applicable large employers, all right, so again, 50 or more full-time employees and or equivalents, the applicable large employer must file a return for each employee, so very similar, the transmittal form. Same deadlines, and applicable large employers with more than 250 returns, they must file electronically. So they will have actually until March 31st of 2016. Keep in mind, it's not focused on the number of current returns, right? Current W-2s. You're going to issue a lot of employees. There's going to be turnover. So, you know, just, you know, that 250 can creep up definitely on an employer that has some major turnover. But they also must furnish a statement, that's the 1095C, to each full-time employee on or before January 31st. And that's basically stating, as you saw in the form, you know, whether coverage was or was not offered. And again, statements sent by mail. So what happens if there's non-compliance penalties that might be assessed? Well, one nice thing that the IRS has done and has provided, it's very welcome here for this year as employers are getting acclimated to this new reporting requirement, is Notice 2013-45. And what that did was provide transitional relief in the current, actually for 2014, but also statements were made that applicable large employers that have made a good faith effort to comply will find penalty relief in filing the 2015 return. Now, it's not that applicable large employer, I mean, so, you know, define good faith. It's not, well, I knew about it and I started to write some things down and here it is. No. You have to file. You have to make that good faith effort to file the transmittal, to provide the employee statements, but they are providing some relief if you indeed have done that. Outside of those reliefs that are currently out there, we really, the penalties flow under 6721 and 6722. These are standard, these are generally here kind of standard penalties that would be assessed for failing to file timely returns, to include all of the required information or incorrect information, you know, failing to then furnish a timely statement or including all the required information on the statement. And these are generally going to fall under the excise tax kind of rules, you know, $100 per day per per claim, you know, per employee, that type of a thing. So they can add up, and but you want to ensure that your groups are making that good faith effort to comply, you know, for this 2015 year. So as we start wrapping this up here a little bit, you got to start spreading the news, right? You got to get your bullhorn out and start talking about this. Your employers are asking a lot of questions right now in relation to what this thing is all about, and they're seeking advice from their partners, wondering, well, can you provide this data? What about that? Can I get it from you? You know, where am I accumulating all of this? So you've got to start spreading the news. So when I was thinking about the webinar here for today, I originally was trying to find Paul Revere, right, riding his horse. I got kind of a cowboy here, but maybe picture Paul Revere, though, right? I mean, just getting out there, yelling, well, in his case, British is coming, but really here, you need to begin to get on your horses, right? Get the horses out of the barn. Get going. Get talking with your current clients and prospects, because it is very important for them to understand where this data is coming from, all right? The employer might have it all, but what are some of the resources that might be out there to accumulate this? So what I've tried to do is just break this down here a little bit for you, and at least to provide some areas where you could begin to look. So, you know, the first that you saw pretty consistently in the statements, in the employee statements, is you're going to need to get demographic information, okay? Now, demographic information can be found very easily, certainly in the payroll system, payroll provider that employer is utilizing. But I put a but there because I want you to remember that many payroll providers, generally, if it's just payroll only, okay, that's what I'm just speaking about, so just payroll only, they are only going to have employee information. They are not necessarily going to have spouse information, dependent information, and that is something that needs to be included on that form, right? So in doing the employee statement. So payroll gets you pretty far, but it may not get you all the data that you seek. Many employers, certainly applicable large employers, are utilizing a benefit admin platform of some kind. I think there is probably the easiest way to gather the data on the employee, but also spouse, dependents, those who are covered. That's probably the most, that's the easiest way to attain probably that information. As you think about demographic information, the carrier could have all of that information. However, does the carrier get the social of the dependents, the date of birth? Probably, but you would, that's why I put the but out there as well, that the carrier may not be the exclusive provider of the demographic information, okay? Lastly, but not enviable, is spreadsheets and filing cabinets, right? I mean, employers are collecting this data, and if they're not seeking it or having it in these other areas, or if they're doing payroll by themselves, you know, in-house, it's probably found in spreadsheets and filing cabinets, and we all know that that's not going to be the most efficient way to gather that information. Why? Because it's static. It's not being updated, and you need to have always up-to-date information throughout the year. Then as you think about insurance coverage information, that gets a little easier. I mean, insurance coverage, if it's fully insured, the carrier is going to probably have all of that information that's needed, so that's positive. Possibly if the TPA, the self-funded TPA, is the plan sponsor, or if not, the self-funded TPA can probably provide a lot of those details. Can that come from you? What are you as an agency? Are you collecting this information? How are you gathering it? Are you gathering it? You probably have a lot of the information from an insurance coverage basis. And then I show here again just the benefit admin platform. Yeah, I mean, most of the time from an employer standpoint, they might have accumulated that coverage information showing who's covered, what's covered, and so forth in that platform. I also want to think about the data requirements for just the standard ACA fulfillment requirements. And kind of what I'm referring to here is, you know, you may not know as a broker what the length of the measurement periods are. How are you to know whether that variable hour employee actually exceeded or met that 30 hours, right? You may or may not, you may have assisted your employers in determining some of these other ACA fulfillment requirements. Because you think about it, the data showing who is full-time is one thing, right? And that can be found in payroll. But who's covered and for what months, we need to know if an employee was maybe under that that limited non-assessment period, right? That initial measurement period where they may not need to get that information. So you're going to have to try to get that information. And honestly, the employer is probably the best source of really getting or seeing, viewing, gathering that information. They're going to know better than anyone whether an employee needs to be covered, not covered, so on and so forth. But I also put you in that same category because I think I see you as the broker, benefit consultant, and the employer really working together to really ensure that the employer is managing the additional ACA fulfillment requirements and certainly some of the data points that might be needed for these forms. And the last thing here, just in regard to, what you need to be doing today is you must begin now. Please do not delay in regard to talking to your employers about this specific requirement. Don't let them wait until the fourth quarter of 2015 to figure out what's going to be done. Yes. Many payroll providers are going to assist and support employers through this filing and employee statement process. That is assured. PrimePay is performing our final assessment here right now that the published regs are out, and we will be making an announcement here soon. But it's not just all payroll. Payroll is going to need payroll providers will need the assistance of a Ben admin platform, the carrier, spreadsheets, filing cabinets. We're going to need your help, and your clients will need your help in really helping drive and consolidating all the data that is needed for these specific reports. So a lot of information. We've come up here to our hour. There is a ton of info there. I trust that the content provided was helpful as we kind of broke down the needs assessment, the data assessment for these forms. And, as I had stated earlier, we've recorded this. You will be able to go to our Broker Concierge YouTube channel here in just a couple days once that gets uploaded and be able to view this information certainly at your leisure. Our Broker Concierge partners, if you are a BC partner of ours, we are providing you a full complement of not only the link to the recording but the slides, an awesome, comprehensive, quick guide, one page on these specific requirements, FAQs, and certainly additional links to other IRS forms. Now, for those of you who are on this webinar and you're not a Broker Concierge member, I ask you to reach out to the Broker Concierge number here on the screen or the email and reach out to us. Learn a little bit more what we're doing here in regard to our partner program. We've made such a strong commitment to you, and we can't thank you all enough for what you mean ultimately to PrimePay and the relationship and the referrals that you provide. So with that, that's going to conclude our webinar here today. I appreciate your time, commitment that you have made, and I wish you the best as you begin to communicate this new employer information requirement to your employers. So with that, have a great day, be safe out there, and we'll talk to you next month. Take care.